Hi class, welcome to this chapter on the job speaking. And as you can see, we will be covering how to create a business presentation. What makes this different than the speeches that you just created in class? How do you effectively communicate in a meeting? How do you communicate in an interview? And how do you effectively communicate in a review, if you're having a review of your work? So some of this information can be applied right now to your current career or your future career. It's very practical information that will hopefully be very helpful to you. So let's get started. How do you create a business presentation? Well, first we have reports. And a report is a form of informative speaking designed to present business-related information to others. So it's pretty much very data-driven, but it's just basic information that you are disseminating to different audiences of your workplace or maybe your constituency of your organization or company. And as you can see, what you would usually report are, it's progress, the account for resources. So if you were given so much money, what is this money being used for and what's the progress, the findings, perhaps some other professional insight, and also if there's any new information that you need to share in this particular report. So a report is a type of informative speaking designed to present business-related information to others. Recommendations, those are proposals arguing for a belief or a course of action. So perhaps you're a manager and you don't agree with the course of action the organization is taking at the current time, or you have a recommendation for a new course of action. So what you are communicating here is, in a sense, a form of on-the-job persuasion. You are looking for approval of your proposal. You want the group, the audience, whomever it may be, if it's upper management, if it's coworkers, if it's those that you supervise, to adopt your ideas or solutions, or perhaps you're selling a product or service. So this is a type of informative speaking where you are recommending a certain product or a belief or a course of action. And whenever you are any kind of business presentation, when you're starting any type of presentation, you want to think about your audience. Yes, we've been talking about that throughout the semester or throughout different modules. To whom are you speaking to? So it's important to know, well, first of all, who will be there. And you want to think about those folks, their attitudes, what they like, what they don't like, their beliefs, their values. What do they value? So, depending on what you're communicating, think about attitudes, beliefs, and values, and think about your audience. Think about questions that might come up. Is there anybody there that's an ally? Anyone there to support what you're saying? Advocates in the audience. What do you truly want them to understand? So again, very much like your informative speech, you're thinking at the very end, okay, what do I want them to understand? What do I want them to walk away with? And think about if there's any situations that or issues that might come up. So you always think about, okay, so if I present this information and someone it contradicts it, or Joe Smith, I know he doesn't like this idea, so you want to think about some possible comeback. So it's really good to prepare yourself, prepare with some notes regarding this, but always, as in any communication episode, to whom are you speaking to, and think about how you will shape your message to be successful based on that. You may need to research. As you know, sometimes you need to do some in-house researching. You need to show the benefits based on this research to the benefits to the entire organization. You want to think about any objections, as I mentioned earlier, rebuttals. And you want to start early. Start your research early. You don't want to do this last minute. So think about your research and how this will, again, shape or be part of your message. Creating your presentation. Hey, look at this. It says sketch out a working outline. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? So you know that you want to have some type of sketch of an outline. You know you want to have an introduction. You have some way to grab their attention to, in a sense, if you need to establish your credibility, and then give them what your purpose of the meeting is and information that you will cover. Remember those 3 points. No more than 20 minutes in a workplace. We know that time equals money. So it's real important that you're concise, that you're focused with your information, that you have 3 main points. 3 main points is to work from is the best. And then obviously you conclude with summing up your points and what action or what thoughts you have for the group. When you present, as you know as well, that it's always good to prepare for, let's say technology isn't working. Let's say you're going to pull up a PowerPoint on your computer. Make sure you have a backup on a flash drive or somehow have a backup. Know the technical support team. If you should have some issues in this place. Create handouts of your slides if you want. If it's an older group, sometimes people like to have the paper in hand as a handout. Again, thinking about your audience, what works best when you present this information. Evaluating, withhold judgment until the end and consider your knowledge, expertise, the perspective of the audience. So you don't want to, kind of share the judgment as you're presenting, but always consider what they have to say at the very end and the perspective of your particular audience. Okay, so that's the business presentation. How do you effectively communicate in a meeting? And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have been part of some type of meeting at work, at an organization, and I'm sure you could share, or you know if you have been part of a long, drawn-out meeting, and at the very end of the meeting, nothing is really accomplished. So it's real important to keep this in mind as the lead of a meeting, wherever it may be, how you prepare and present to the group to keep things focused, to stay on an agenda, and to be fruitful or to have something accomplished in this particular time. So what we're going to be looking at when you're preparing for a meeting is always to share your purpose of the meeting to folks, whether it's you're emailing the group beforehand or you're verbally saying it, or whatever means you are as far as communicating the meeting. You want to share the purpose, and it's real important to have an agenda beforehand, because that gives folks a chance to go over what will be discussed at the meeting, and in a sense the group can prepare and think about how they will contribute to this particular meeting. Now, if this is impossible, if you can't prepare the agenda beforehand, it's important to hand out an agenda right before the meeting starts so everybody knows what will be accomplished in that time frame. Prepare any speakers. If you're having anybody speaking at the meeting, make sure you have prepared them and they know that you're planning to call on them. Real important to stick to the time. So, if you're saying it's a 1-hour meeting, and usually that's what meetings are, 1 hour, stick to your time. Be sure that as you're going through the agenda, you're following it correctly so that you meet the correct time. Room selection, getting there early. Again, very important to think about where the venue is that you are speaking. There's no distractions, so you want to minimize the distractions. You want to get there early as the lead. You want to conduct introductions. Again, sometimes as a lead, you may go around the room and introduce everybody, or you will just ask everybody in the meeting to just give a quick name overview and who they are or what their position is at work. So it's real important so everybody knows to whom they're speaking to in that particular meeting. And lastly, keep control. Sometimes if you ever taken small group communication or you have studied group communication, you will see that sometimes you have people who dominate the communication, or some people who are very quiet, or some people who just go off tangent and go off the agenda, and they are speaking more from a narcissistic point of view. So it's real important that you keep control and you keep the agenda in place. And then lastly, leave time to summarize at the very end of the meeting what you accomplished and what you look forward to the future. Be sure that you respond quickly when someone asks you a question, to read the agenda and prepare ahead of time, stick to the time, and actively listen, as we mentioned before, and ask appropriate questions. So we're going to look at now interviewing. How do you conduct an interview? If you're a manager and you need to conduct an interview, you want to be sure that you meet with HR, human resources beforehand, to be sure that you can find out what questions you can ask and what questions you cannot ask. Because legally, there are questions that you may ask of a candidate and there's some that you may not. So it's important that you follow that particular format. You want to obviously review the candidate's information, set a time and location, and then come up with a list of questions that you are going to interview that person. So, when the person comes in and when you are interviewing, you want to observe the candidate closely. You want to pay attention. You want to kind of rank the qualifications as he or she is speaking. A big part is considering the personality fit. Will this person fit into this particular culture in which you work? Is it a corporation? Is it an educational facility? Is it an industry? Obviously, you want to check references, and you may ask for a second opinion. You may have another person in the interview. Sometimes people interview with a committee, so you can ask for a second opinion. Prepare to be interviewed. So this might be something that you may be more familiar with. Is how do you prepare for the interview? As you know, you would have an application to fill out, and also you would have your resume. Resume is good to bring to that particular interview. You may have created a cover letter, and the cover letter just kind of pinpoints your qualifications for that particular job, where the resume is an overview of your work experience and your education. Before the interview, you got to do your homework. You definitely want to research the job and the organization. You can easily do this by looking them up via web. You can maybe even talk to people. You want to think about your introduction and your closing statement. As we know, when someone is speaking, sometimes the only thing that is remembered, it depends on the listening capability of the receivers, is the very first thing or the very first opening and the very last concluding remarks. So you want to be sure those are strong. I like to say in your closing statement, if you're being interviewed, you want to think about you want to promote yourself, so you want to think about yourself being a commercial and tell that employer 3 reasons why they should hire you. You want to research and prepare questions. Okay, so you want to have some questions prepared about the organization, about the job, and then lastly, be familiar with the application material. And as you know, on interview day, you want to dress for success. Sometimes they say a good rule of thumb is to dress for the manager position, for a position higher than you. Arrive early. Turn off your phone. You don't want any distractions. Don't wear any heavy perfumes. If you have any piercings or markings, you want to take them off. You want to be as professional as possible. Be confident. Show enthusiasm. Think about your nonverbal communication, your eye contact. Think about your language you're using very formal language, and always ask questions. It's good to maybe perhaps even practice beforehand and think and ask the opinion of somebody else how your nonverbals are communicating. And lastly, on the interview day, you want to redirect any illegal questions that you just feel that you don't want to answer at that time. Perhaps it's just something sensitive, or you just want to you don't feel you should answer them. You always want to direct those questions back to your qualifications for the job. And lastly, most importantly, you always want to send a thank you note, depending on the type of interview, whether it's a card, an email, or a snail mail. Send a thank you for the interview. That concludes this chapter on speaking on the job. Thank you.